if the hand demon killed Tanjiro? What would happen to the story, and most importantly, what would happen to Nezuko? Early beginnings. First off, a lot of little things at the beginning of the story just don't happen. Swamp demon fight doesn't happen. Meeting Muzan doesn't happen. Lady Tamayo, Suzumaru the Arrow Man, and Yahaba the WNBA star, poof, gone. That means there's just a few extra sets of little demon footprints running around, which means a few more innocent families won't be seeing the light of day anymore. But don't worry, pointless death is going to be something of a theme on this path. Next, we get to the Woodland Mansion with the drum demon Kyogai. Enter Inosuke and Zenitsu. The mansion. Now in the original story, it's Tanjiro's crow that leads both him and Zenitsu to the mansion. However, considering Zenitsu was so close to it before Tanjiro even showed up, it's safe to assume that Zenitsu was heading there anyway, or if not, would be assigned to it shortly. The fight against Kyogai and the other demons in the mansion commences, and Zenitsu unlocks his deadly sleep breathing, first form, me. Since Zenitsu would essentially end up fighting Kyogai alone, and extremely involuntarily at that, the fight would last a little longer, since he'd have to clear out the peanut gallery of lesser demons, plus save the civilians. And of course, our little Dorito boy would first have to find the former Lower Moon. But thanks to his elite sense of hearing that stands up to even Tanjiro's sense of smell, all he needs to do is follow the sound of drums. At this point, it's a fair argument that the actual fight against Kyogai would go better than it did with Tanjiro. Zenitsu's ridiculous speed and ping-pong blitz fighting style would likely help him bounce off the spinning walls regardless of their orientation, and behead Kyogai before he has a chance to even go all out. So the mansion arc ends in a resounding success. Until Zenitsu wakes up, of course, and inevitably starts asking the people he just saved to save him from the big scary demons. Speaking of which, Inosuke. But of course, without Tanjiro here to actually talk or fight the boar down and bring together a happy trio, the interaction goes a lot faster. Inosuke kicks Zenitsu around a bunch and then just leaves. So much for that. But no worries, they'll soon cross paths again in the Mount Nagatumo arc. Mount Nagatumo. This was a gear-shifting arc in the story. We get to see the full might of the Lower Moons, get a much better look at the Hashiras fighting, and of course an extended look at our trio kicking ass, including Tanjiro's legendary Hinokami Kagura scene. So it's pretty interesting that with the exclusion of that last bit, not much really changes. In fact, practically nothing at all changes in the grander scope of the story. Tanjiro's existence had very little impact on the individual fights of Zenitsu and Inosuke, so those go about pretty much as normal. Without his super smell and water breathing, it would mean that quite a lot more demon slayers would die under the hands of the mother spider, unfortunately. But that would just mean a handful of extra casualties until the Hashira showed up. Like we said, unnecessary death. You'll get used to it. As for Rui, well, Tanjiro had shockingly little impact on actually damaging Rui, aside from just holding him in place until Giyu got there. So without that, it would mean Giyu and his partner Shinobu spend a little extra energy taking out those skittering spiders. But overall, the result is the same. The Lower Moon dies, the mountain is secured, the Hashira return for a very non-special meeting, and Zenitsu plus Inosuke still end up training under the fluttery wing of the insect Hashira Shinobu. But while it's all coming up roses right now, that's only the start of the bloody train that follows. The Mugen Train. This is where Tanjiro's absence really starts affecting the story. Zenitsu and Inosuke are assigned to the Mugen Train with Rengoku, but since their only time training together was at Shinobu's estate, their teamwork is a little frayed. They're constantly at ends with one another without a mediator to act as the voice of reason. All the Slayers fall asleep under Enmu's blood demon magic, and all eventually get back up again, albeit a little later. But without Tanjiro spearheading the attack against Enmu's main body, killing the Lower Moon becomes a lot more tricky. Between the three of them, protecting the entire train, plus trying to catch the Dream Demon, stretches the entire party extremely thin. Alas, however, they do have a Hashira amongst their midst. Kyojuro Rengoku's unwavering will blazes ahead, and together with Inosuke's help, he'd be able to bring down the demon and save every single person on the train. Eventually. We've seen from Rengoku's one shot that the Hashira is used to fighting with one sense impaired, so not using his eyes shouldn't be a huge problem, but it would still tire him out. He'd still end up expending a lot more energy than he normally would, both doing a protect and an attack. And unfortunately, this would leave him much more winded when fighting the real threat of the arc, Akaza. As a result, it's very likely that Akaza's fight with Rengoku would not last until dawn, and instead would end slightly before. Inosuke is nowhere near prepared to fight an Upper Moon, and is heavily injured from fighting Enma. Zenitsu has passed out in a bad way. which would leave Akaza free, if even just for a couple of minutes, to devour many survivors of the crashed train, leading to an absolute massacre and a huge hit to the Demon Slayer cores and their reputation. But at the very least, it's possible that Inosuke and Zenitsu survive this one. They're strong enough to stay alive until sunlight, but that changes very soon. The Entertainment District. Again, without Tanjiro, the losses continue to pile up. Daki massacres large chunks of the Entertainment District and of course gets stronger from their blood. Tengen eventually cuts off her head, revealing Gyutaro, but this time the fight is a lot more brutal. While Zenitsu and Inosuke fight Daki, Tengen is left fighting Gyutaro alone, which is pretty bad in the early stages. Between the poison, scythes, and deadly robes, the Demon Slayers are very slightly outnumbered. But tooth and nail they fight, until eventually, painfully, Tengen sacrifices his life, and they win. Zenitsu and Inosuke would be heavily injured, possibly permanently, losing limbs, organs, or a combination of both. Whether they survive or not is really up to a coin flip, but it doesn't really matter because at this point, their role in the story ends here, for now, as they spend several months in recovery, at which point the main events of the story will have passed them by. But no worries, the next arc doesn't concern them anyways. The Swordsmith Village. Oh boy, these swordsmiths are in major trouble. Without Tanjiro there, that leaves only Genya, Mitsuri, and Muichiro to fight two slimy upper moons. Genya would be quickly overpowered by Hantengu, sustaining heavy injuries and possibly dying before he can impede them all that much. In fact, without Tanjiro there to play the role of loyal bloodhound sniffing out Hantengu's real body, Genya wouldn't even be able to find the main body, meaning he'd keep fighting clones until he runs out of energy or is simply overpowered. Mitsuri would have to work double time then, fighting not only Gyoko's minions, but also the entire rogues gallery of Hantengu's clones. Of course, she's quickly joined by Muichiro, who absolutely demolished Gyoko, but the poison in his system would have taken a toll on him, meaning he'd either need to be healed before jumping into battle or fight severely impaired. Either way, many swordsmith deaths later, Hantengu's real body is discovered, and the two upper moons are beaten, but likely at the expense of Ahashira's death. And because of his poisoned state, that honor would likely befall Muichiro. Ouch. Endgame. The Swordsmith Village is decimated, but barely hanging on by a thread. Combined with a dwindling number of Hashira, what ensues is exactly what Gyoko envisioned. The Demon Slayer core is at its weakest point, having taken consecutive blow after blow, and now it's time to strike the very head, Ubayashiki himself. In the meantime, the Hashira training arc continues, but more bare bones and with significantly fewer promising young upstarts. Without Muzan realizing there's a cure for the sun, he doesn't call back his demons, and therefore the Hashira still have to patrol their regions for demon activity, meaning they won't have as much time to actually mentor what little students are left. And so finally, Muzan makes his move. Ubayashiki goes boom, and the Infinity Castle arc begins. Except, it's a disaster. Without Zenitsu, Kaigaku doesn't die. Without Inosuke, Doma still dies, but not before taking Kanao with him. Without Tanjiro, Akaza kills Giyu easily. Without Muichiro and maybe even Genya, Kokoshibo most likely wins against Gyomei and Sanemi, or at the very least takes one of them with him. The Demon Slayer core is in shambles until Upper Moon 4 is killed and the castle collapses. But it's no use. More than half of the Upper Moons are still alive, and almost all, if not all the Hashira are dead. The remaining pillars could try to escape, but would immediately be cut down by the moons, and after that, that's game over for humanity. The remaining retired Hashira may attempt to scramble together a new Demon Slayer organization with whatever skills and pupils they have left, a Council of the Elders, but they'll immediately fall to Akaza and Kokoshibo. And that's the end of the run. Humanity loses without even getting close to Muzan. It's almost anticlimactic how quickly each spark of hope fizzles out. But hey, that's what happens when you let the protagonist die in Arc 1. Thankfully, there's a much more hopeful and more interesting way this story could go, and that's with the passing of the protagonist's torch from one sibling to another.